The dust swirled like golden ghosts across the horizon as Danielle Whitley clutched her worn leather journal to her chest, the stagecoach rattling beneath her with each stone and divot in the unforgiving trail to Silver Creek. The year was 1878, and she had left everything behind in Boston: her comfortable life as a schoolteacher, her overbearing parents, and the suffocating expectations that had threatened to snuff out the last ember of her spirit. At 23, Danielle had made the most daring decision of her sheltered life. Responding to an advertisement for teachers in the Arizona Territory had seemed romantic and brave when she'd sealed the envelope in her father's study. Now, as the landscape grew wilder and the civilization she knew faded with each passing mile, doubt gnawed at her resolve. "First time out west, miss." A gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. Danielle looked up to see an elderly gentleman with a silver-streaked beard watching her with kind eyes. "Is it that obvious?" she replied, attempting to smooth the wrinkles from her traveling dress. The old man chuckled. "You've got that look about you, like you're half expecting Indians to attack or outlaws to rob us blind at any moment. And should I not be concerned about such things?" Danielle asked, her voice barely masking her anxiety. "Those dime novels paint quite the picture," he said with a dismissive wave. "The West is wild enough without the embellishments. Silver Creek's a decent town, though, growing. They got themselves a proper sheriff last year. Even built a schoolhouse, which I reckon is where you're headed." Danielle nodded, feeling a flutter of relief. "Yes, I'm to be the new teacher." "Well, those children are lucky to have such a proper lady teaching them their letters." He tipped his hat to her. "Name's Harold Jenkins. I run the general store in town." "Danielle Whitley," she responded with a polite nod. "I look forward to purchasing supplies from your establishment." The conversation ebbed as the stagecoach crested a hill, revealing a valley below. Nestled between scrubby hills and a winding creek that flashed silver in the afternoon sun, was a town larger than she had anticipated, with several streets of wooden buildings, some with false fronts reaching toward the cloudless sky. "Silver Creek," Harold announced with obvious pride. "Not much to look at compared to Boston, I'd wager, but she's home." The stagecoach lurched to a stop before a dusty building with a sign declaring it the Silver Creek Hotel. Danielle gathered her things, heart pounding with apprehension and excitement. As the driver helped her down, her gaze was drawn to a commotion further down the street. A crowd had gathered outside what appeared to be a saloon. At the center of the throng stood a tall figure, a man with broad shoulders and a stance that commanded attention even from a distance. "What's happening over there?" she asked Harold, who had climbed down behind her. The shopkeeper squinted in that direction and sighed. "That'd be Jacob Everett settling things his way again. Sheriff's been trying to tame him for years, but Jake's got his own ideas about justice." Danielle couldn't tear her eyes away from the confrontation. Even from this distance, there was something magnetic about the man named Jacob. His movements were fluid yet powerful as he faced down another man whose hand hovered near his holstered gun. "Is he an outlaw?" Danielle whispered, scandalized and intrigued. Harold laughed heartily. "Jake? No, miss. He's one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. Just doesn't cotton much to town rules or being told what to do. Fought for the Union in the war, came back a different man. Built himself a fine spread about 5 miles out. He seems dangerous," Danielle observed, watching as Jacob said something that made the crowd laugh and the other man back down. "Only to those who cross him or threaten what he cares about," Harold replied. "To everyone else, he's just Jake. Stubborn as a mule, but you won't find a more honest man in these parts." As if sensing her scrutiny, Jacob suddenly turned, his gaze cutting across the distance between them. For a breathtaking moment, their eyes locked. Even from afar, Danielle could feel the intensity of his stare, a blue so vivid it was visible even at this distance. Something electric passed between them, a recognition that defied logic. Danielle quickly averted her gaze, flustered by the unexpected connection. "Come along, Miss Whitley," Harold said, seemingly oblivious to the exchange. "Let's get you settled. Martha at the hotel will look after you until the school board can meet you proper." Nodding mutely, Danielle followed Harold toward the hotel, fighting the urge to look back. But just before entering the establishment, she couldn't resist one final glance. Jacob Everett was still watching her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Then, with deliberate slowness, he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before turning back to his business. Danielle's cheeks flushed as she hurried into the hotel, knowing with sudden, inexplicable certainty that Silver Creek would be nothing like she had imagined, and that Jacob Everett would be the reason why. The hotel room was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window overlooking the main street. Danielle unpacked her few belongings, arranging her books on the desk and hanging her dresses in the wardrobe. The journey had left her exhausted, but her mind was too active for rest. She washed her face and hands, changed into a fresh blue dress, and decided to explore the town that would be her home for the foreseeable future. After all, she would need to know her surroundings to properly educate her students about their community. Silver Creek was a curious blend of frontier ruggedness and attempts at refinement. The main street boasted several substantial buildings: a bank, Harold's General Store, a dressmaker's shop, and the imposing two-story structure that housed the sheriff's office and courthouse. Smaller establishments filled the spaces between, and Danielle noted with approval that there was even a small lending library attached to the newspaper office. Children played in the dusty street, women carried baskets of goods, and men went about their business. It was a living, breathing community far from the savage wilderness she had half feared. As she walked, she became aware of curious glances. A new face in a small town was always cause for interest, and a single woman even more so. Danielle kept her posture straight and her expression composed, just as her mother had taught her. "You must be the new schoolteacher," called a friendly voice. Turning, Danielle found herself facing a woman perhaps 10 years her senior, dressed in a practical brown dress with an apron. "Yes, Danielle Whitley," she replied with a smile, extending her hand. "I arrived just this afternoon." "Sarah Miller," the woman introduced herself, taking Danielle's hand warmly. "My husband's the doctor here. I've got 2 little ones who will be in your classroom come Monday." They've been beside themselves with excitement since we heard a real Boston lady was coming to teach. "I hope I don't disappoint them," Danielle said, touched by the warm welcome. "Nonsense. Just the fact that you came all this way shows you've got gumption." Not many Eastern ladies would brave the territories. Sarah fell into step beside Danielle. "Have you seen the schoolhouse yet?" "No, I was hoping to find it on my walk." "It's just past the church at the edge of town. Not much to look at, but it's got a good roof and solid walls. The children bring firewood for the stove in winter." Sarah pointed toward the end of the street. "Would you like me to show you?" "That would be wonderful, thank you." As they walked, Sarah provided a running commentary on the town and its inhabitants. Danielle learned that Silver Creek had been founded 15 years earlier after a minor silver strike, but had grown more as an agricultural and ranching center after the initial deposits played out. "The Everett Ranch provides most of the beef for 50 miles around," Sarah explained as they passed the butcher's shop. "Jacob inherited it from his uncle about 8 years ago after the war, turned it from a struggling operation into the finest spread in the territory." "I believe I saw Mr. Everett earlier," Danielle said carefully, remembering their brief locked gaze. "There seemed to be some sort of disagreement." Sarah sighed. "That would be Jake and Bill Harmon at it again. Bill's been trying to buy a parcel of Jake's land that borders the creek. Jake won't sell at any price, and Bill doesn't take rejection well. Those two have been locking horns for years." "Is Mr. Everett married?" The question slipped out before Danielle could stop it, and she immediately felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Sarah gave her a knowing smile. "No, and not for lack of trying on the part of every unmarried woman in 3 counties. Jake's what you might call a confirmed bachelor, polite to ladies, generous to a fault, but keeps his distance." They rounded a corner, and Sarah gestured to a simple white painted building with a bell tower. "Here we are your domain." The schoolhouse was modest but well constructed, with a covered porch and large windows to let in light. Behind it stretched a yard with a few simple play structures and a well. "It's perfect," Danielle breathed, already envisioning children at their lessons within its walls. Sarah produced a key. The school board asked me to give you this. They'll meet with you officially tomorrow, but they wanted you to have a chance to get acquainted with your classroom. Danielle accepted the key with heartfelt thanks and stepped into the building that would be the center of her new life. The interior was cool and dim, with rows of simple desks facing a larger desk and blackboard at the front. Shelves held a modest collection of books and teaching materials. Running her fingers over the smooth wood of the teacher's desk, Danielle felt a surge of purpose. This was why she had come to make a difference in children's lives, to build something meaningful. "I'll leave you to get acquainted," Sarah said from the doorway. "Supper at the hotel is at 6. Martha's cooking is better than you might expect. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Miller." "Sarah, please, we're not so formal out here." With a friendly wave, Sarah departed, leaving Danielle alone in the quiet schoolhouse. For the next hour, Danielle explored her new workplace, examining the books, organizing supplies, and making notes about what she would need. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they stopped just outside. A shadow fell across the open doorway, and Danielle looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. "Miss Whitley, I presume?" The voice was deep and resonant, with a subtle drawl that marked it as distinctly Western. Danielle stood, smoothing her skirts. "Yes." "And you are?" The figure stepped forward into the light, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Jacob Everett, even more imposing up close than he had appeared from a distance. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave to it. His features were strong and weathered by sun and wind, but it was his eyes that held her blue as a summer sky, direct and penetrating. "Jacob Everett," he said, inclining his head slightly. "I'm on the school board, thought I'd check in, see if you needed anything." His presence filled the small schoolhouse, making it seem suddenly cramped. Danielle found herself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. "That's very kind," she finally managed. "I was just taking inventory. The school seems well supplied, though I'll need to order some additional books." Jacob nodded, his gaze traveling around the room before returning to her face. "Harold mentioned you arrived on today's stage. You've come a long way. From Boston, yes. What brings a Boston lady all the way to Arizona territory? We're not exactly known for our cultural refinements." There was no mockery in his tone, just genuine curiosity. Danielle considered her answer carefully. "I wanted to make a difference somewhere it would matter. In Boston, there are dozens of qualified teachers. Here, children might not have the opportunity for education without someone willing to come." Something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps. "Admirable. Still, it's a hard life out here compared to what you're used to." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Everett." The words came out more defiantly than she had intended. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his stern features. "I don't doubt it, Miss Whitley. Anyone who'd travel 2,000 miles alone to teach strangers' children has backbone." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Thank you. I hope I can live up to expectations. Just teach them to think for themselves and you'll do fine." He placed his hat back on his head. "The board meeting's at 10 tomorrow at the courthouse. I'll have my foreman bring over some firewood for the stove before then." "Nights get cold, even in spring." "That's very thoughtful, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. We all look after each other out here. It's how we survive." He turned to leave, then paused. "One piece of advice, Miss Whitley?" "Yes." "Silver Creek might seem tame compared to what you imagined, but the territory still has its dangers. Don't wander too far alone until you know the land better." The concern in his voice seemed genuine, but Danielle bristled slightly at being treated as a helpless Easterner. "I appreciate the warning, Mr. Everett, but I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you are at that. Still, no shame in being cautious in unfamiliar territory." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good day, Miss Whitley." After he left, Danielle found herself staring at the empty doorway, her heart beating faster than normal. Jacob Everett was unlike any man she had met in Boston, direct, unpolished, yet possessed of a natural dignity and authority that commanded respect. And something else. Something she was reluctant to acknowledge. He had awakened a flutter of awareness in her that was entirely new and slightly alarming. Shaking off the feeling, Danielle returned to her inventory. She had come to Silver Creek to teach, not to be distracted by a blue-eyed rancher, no matter how compelling his presence. The school board meeting the next morning was held in the town's modest courthouse. Danielle arrived early, dressed in her most professional attire, a dove-gray dress with minimal embellishments, her honey-blonde hair secured in a neat chignon. The board consisted of 5 members: Mayor Thomas Green, a portly man with a jovial manner; Reverend Paul Simmons, whose severe expression suggested he might be a challenging overseer; Sarah's husband, Dr. James Miller, who greeted Danielle warmly, Mrs. Eleanor Finch, a formidable widow who owned the hotel, and Jacob Everett, who acknowledged her with a slight nod as she entered. "Miss Whitley, welcome," Mayor Green began after introductions were complete. "We're mighty pleased to have a teacher of your qualifications join our community." "Thank you, Mayor. I'm eager to begin." For the next hour, the board questioned her about her teaching philosophy, methods of discipline, and curriculum plans. Danielle answered confidently, drawing on her 4 years of experience in Boston. "And what about religious instruction?" Reverend Simmons inquired, leaning forward intently. "I trust you plan to incorporate daily Bible readings." Danielle chose her words carefully. "While I believe moral instruction is important, I think it best if religious education remains the domain of the church and family. I will, of course, encourage virtuous behavior and respect among my students." The Reverend frowned, but before he could respond, Jacob spoke up. "The schoolhouse isn't a church, Reverend. Miss Whitley's job is to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. Sunday school is your territory." "The moral fiber of our children," Reverend Simmons began heatedly. "Is the responsibility of their parents," Jacob interrupted, his tone firm but not confrontational. "Miss Whitley will have her hands full teaching children of all ages and levels. Let's not burden her with additional expectations." The 2 men locked eyes in what was clearly a continuation of an ongoing disagreement. Mayor Green cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should move on to practical matters. Miss Whitley, school begins on Monday. We have approximately 30 children enrolled, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Their abilities vary considerably. I'm accustomed to teaching multiple levels simultaneously," Danielle assured him. "In my previous position, I had similar arrangements." Mrs. Finch spoke up for the first time. "What about living arrangements?" "The hotel is suitable for temporary accommodations, but not ideal for a permanent residence." "I've been giving that some thought," Dr. Miller said. "The old Peterson place at the edge of town is vacant. It's small but sound and within walking distance of the school." "That seems like an excellent solution," Danielle agreed, relieved at the prospect of her own space. "Is it available for rent?" "It belongs to me," Jacob said quietly. "Peterson was my foreman until his wife passed last winter. He moved back east to be with his daughter. The house has been sitting empty since." "I couldn't possibly," Danielle began, feeling uncomfortable at the thought of being further indebted to him. "It makes sense," Jacob continued as if she hadn't spoken. "You need a place to live, and I have no use for the house at present. Standard rent would be fair, $3 a month, including the garden plot." It was an extremely reasonable sum, and Danielle knew it. Property in Boston would cost 10 times that amount. "That's very fair," she acknowledged. "Thank you." "Then it's settled," Mayor Green declared cheerfully. "Jake, when can Miss Whitley move in?" "Today, if she wishes. I'll have my men bring over some firewood and make sure everything's in working order." The meeting concluded shortly thereafter with details about her salary, $40 a month, paid by the town council, and expectations regarding school hours and holidays. As the board members dispersed, Jacob approached Danielle. "If you're amenable, I can show you the house now. It's not far." "That would be ideal, thank you." They walked together down the main street, an odd pair that drew curious glances from townspeople. Jacob's long strides slowed to accommodate her more measured pace. "I apologize for the dust," he said after a moment of silence. "We haven't had rain in weeks." "It's quite all right. I'm learning to appreciate the unique qualities of your landscape." Danielle glanced up at him. Thank you for your support regarding religious instruction. Jacob's mouth quirked. Reverend Simmons is a good man but zealous. He forgets that not everyone shares his particular interpretations. You sound as though you speak from experience. Let's just say the Reverend and I have had our differences of opinion. His tone suggested the subject was closed. They turned onto a side street where the houses were more modest. At the very end stood a small cabin with a covered porch. Though simple, it was well maintained, with curtains still hanging in the windows and a garden plot to one side. It's not fancy, Jacob said as they approached. 2 rooms living area with a kitchen corner and a bedroom. Outhouse is around back. There's a pump for water on the porch. He produced a key and opened the door, standing aside to let Danielle enter first. The interior was surprisingly pleasant. The main room contained a table with 4 chairs, a small sofa near the stone fireplace, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, shelves, and a dry sink. Everything was clean if slightly dusty from disuse. Mrs. Peterson was particular about her home, Jacob explained, watching Danielle's reaction. She'd be pleased to know another woman who takes pride in her work is living here. Danielle moved to the bedroom doorway. Inside was a simple bed frame with a straw-filled mattress, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a mirror. Sunlight streamed through a window overlooking the garden. "It's perfect," she said sincerely, turning back to Jacob. "More than I expected, truly." Something in her expression must have affected him, for his gaze softened momentarily. "Good, I'll have your things brought over from the hotel." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like me to ask Sarah Miller to help you get settled, a woman's touch and all that?" The consideration touched her. "That would be very kind, thank you." He nodded and moved toward the door. "I'll send someone with provisions to get you started. Flour, coffee, basic necessities. You can pay it back when you're settled." "Mr. Everett," Danielle said, stopping him. "I appreciate all your assistance, but I don't want to be a burden. I'm perfectly capable." "It's not about capability, Miss Whitley," he interrupted, his blue eyes intent. "Out here, we help each other. Today I help you, tomorrow you help someone else. That's how communities work." Put that way, it seemed less like charity and more like the natural order of things. "I understand. Thank you." He tipped his hat and departed, his tall figure silhouetted against the bright Arizona sky. By evening, Danielle was settled in her new home. Sarah had indeed come to help, bringing linens, kitchenware, and invaluable advice about local customs and resources. Jacob's foreman had delivered firewood and a crate of provisions, along with her trunks from the hotel. As darkness fell, Danielle sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The vastness of the landscape was both intimidating and exhilarating. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a sense of rightness in her decision. This wild, beautiful place could become home, and its people, particularly one tall rancher with penetrating blue eyes, were far more intriguing than she had anticipated. The first day of school dawned clear and cool. Danielle had spent the weekend preparing lessons and memorizing the names of her students from the rolls provided by Mayor Green. She dressed with care in a navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs, professional but practical. When she arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, she was surprised to find several children already waiting, their faces alight with curiosity. Word of the Boston lady teacher had clearly spread. "Good morning," she greeted them warmly. "I'm Miss Whitley." A chorus of shy good mornings answered her as she unlocked the door. By the time the school bell rang at 8 o'clock, all 30 students had arrived, ranging from tiny 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers. Danielle called them to order, her heart full as she surveyed the eager and a few not-so-eager faces before her. "Welcome, students. I'm very pleased to meet you all. We're going to learn many things together this year, but first, I'd like to learn about you." The morning passed in a flurry of assessments and introductions. Danielle quickly identified her strongest students, 14-year-old Emily Miller, who had clearly inherited her father's intelligence; Benjamin Taylor, a serious 12-year-old with an aptitude for mathematics; and surprisingly, Caleb Everett, a quiet 10-year-old who she learned was Jacob's nephew, orphaned during the war and now his ward. Uncle Jake says learning is more important than anything, Caleb told her earnestly during their reading assessment. He taught me my letters himself before we even had a school. The image of the imposing rancher patiently teaching a small boy to read was unexpectedly touching. Your uncle is a wise man, Danielle replied. Education opens many doors. By noon, when the children were released for lunch, Danielle had a clear understanding of the challenges ahead. While some students were reasonably advanced, others had significant gaps in their education due to the transient nature of frontier life. Creating lesson plans that would engage all levels would require creativity and dedication. As the children scattered to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Danielle remained at her desk, making notes. A knock at the open door drew her attention. Jacob Everett stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Whitley, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. The children are at lunch." She rose from her desk, inexplicably flustered by his unexpected appearance. Caleb forgot his lunch. Jacob held up a cloth-wrapped package. "Thought I'd bring it by on my way to meet with the cattle buyer." "That's very thoughtful. He's in the schoolyard." Jacob nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, his gaze traveled around the classroom, taking in the neat rows of desks, the primers open on her desk, the alphabet cards she had hung along the wall. "You've made changes already," he observed, "small ones." The classroom was well arranged, but I believe in creating a stimulating environment. A half smile crossed his face. "You sound like my sister-in-law, Caleb's mother. She was a teacher back in Virginia before she married my brother." His expression sobered. "She would have approved of you." The personal revelation surprised Danielle. "I'm sorry for your loss in Caleb's. He's a bright boy." "He is. Takes after his father that way." Jacob shifted, suddenly seeming less comfortable. "I should let you get back to your work. Just wanted to make sure he ate proper." "Of course." "And thank you again for the house. It's perfect for my needs," he nodded. "Glad to hear it. Good day, Miss Whitley." As he turned to leave, Danielle found herself calling after him. "Mr. Everett," he paused, looking back questioningly. The school could use some maps and additional readers. "Would the board consider an allocation for such materials?" His expression warmed slightly. "Write up what you need. I'll make sure it gets considered at the next meeting." He hesitated, then added, "Or you could present it yourself. The board meets the first Tuesday of each month." "I'll do that." "Thank you." After he left, Danielle returned to her notes, but found her thoughts drifting. There was more to Jacob Everett than met the eye, a complexity that intrigued her despite her determination to focus solely on her teaching duties. The weeks that followed settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings and afternoons were devoted to teaching, while evenings were spent planning lessons, grading assignments, and slowly transforming the Peterson house into her home. Weekends often included social obligations as the town embraced its new Teacher Sunday services at Reverend Simmons's church, occasional dinners with the Millers, and teas with other townswomen. Danielle's garden flourished under her careful attention, providing fresh vegetables to supplement the supplies she purchased from Harold's store. She discovered a talent for adapting to frontier life that surprised even her, learning to cook on a wood stove, manage with limited water, and appreciate the simple pleasures of a community where neighbors genuinely looked out for one another. Her students progressed well, responding to her patient but firm teaching style. Even the most reluctant learners showed improvement, and Danielle found herself growing attached to each child in her care. She saw Jacob occasionally at church, during his infrequent visits to town, or when he came to collect Caleb after school. Their interactions remained polite but brief, though Danielle was increasingly aware of his presence whenever he was near. There was an intensity to him that both unsettled and attracted her, a quality she couldn't quite define but found herself thinking about in quiet moments. It was mid-May when their cautious distance was finally breached. A spring storm had blown in unexpectedly, bringing thunder, lightning, and torrential rain that turned the dusty streets to mud within minutes. Danielle had dismissed her students early, watching anxiously as parents arrived to escort the younger children home. Only Caleb remained, peering worriedly through the schoolhouse window at the deluge. "Uncle Jake usually comes on Fridays," he explained when Danielle asked if someone would fetch him. but maybe he didn't know about the storm. I'm sure he'll come as soon as he can, Danielle reassured him, though privately she wondered if the rain might have made the roads impassable. Meanwhile, why don't we use this time for some extra reading practice? They were deep into the adventures of Robinson Crusoe when the schoolhouse door burst open, admitting a gust of wind and rain along with Jacob Everett. His duster was soaked through, water dripping from his hat brim and pooling at his boots. "Uncle Jake," Caleb exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Hey there, partner." Jacob's voice was rough with what might have been concern. "Sorry I'm late. Creek's rising fast. We need to head out before it floods the low road." "Is it safe to travel?" Danielle asked, alarmed by the implication. Jacob's eyes met hers. "Not ideal, but we'll manage." "The ranch is on higher ground." He turned to Caleb. "Get your things, quick now." As Caleb gathered his books, Jacob addressed Danielle again. "You should stay in town tonight, Miss Whitley. Your place is near the creek bed if it overflows." The warning in his tone was unmistakable. Danielle's house, while charming, was indeed situated in a low-lying area that could be vulnerable to flooding. "I'll seek shelter with the Millers," she assured him. "Their home is on the hill." Relief flickered across his face. "Good, don't try to return to your house until the water recedes." Something in his evident concern touched her. "I'll be careful, Mr. Everett," Caleb returned, bundled in his coat. Jacob placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "Ready?" "Yes, sir. Thank you for the story, Miss Whitley." "You're welcome, Caleb. Be safe." She watched as they stepped back into the storm, Jacob shielding the boy with his own body against the driving rain. Danielle quickly secured the schoolhouse and made her way to the Miller's home, where Sarah welcomed her warmly. They watched from the window as the rain continued unabated into the evening. "I'm worried about those who live near the creek," Sarah confessed as they prepared a simple supper. "The last time we had a storm like this, 3 homes were damaged, including the Peterson house." Danielle asked, thinking of her few possessions. "No, that one's usually all right. It's set back just enough, but Jake was right to warn you, better safe than sorry." The storm raged through the night, finally subsiding in the early hours of morning. After breakfast, Danielle thanked her hosts and set out to check on her home, picking her way carefully through muddy streets. As she rounded the corner to her street, her heart sank. Water had indeed breached the creek banks, flooding the road and several yards. From a distance, her house appeared to be spared the worst, sitting as it did on a slight rise, but the garden was completely submerged. As she drew closer, she was startled to see a familiar figure on her porch, Jacob Everett, looking as though he'd been working for hours. His clothes were mud-splattered, and he was stacking sandbags around the foundation of the house. "Mr. Everett," she called, making her way carefully along the less flooded path. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the morning chill. "Miss Whitley, I was just finishing up." "What are you doing here?" she asked, surveying the protective barrier he had created around her home. "Creek started overflowing around dawn. Thought I'd check on your place." He gestured to the sandbags. "These should keep the water out if it rises more, but it's starting to recede now." Danielle was momentarily speechless at the realization that he had come all this way, after what must have been a difficult journey home the night before, simply to protect her modest house. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "Thank you seems inadequate." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his usual guarded demeanor. "No need for thanks, just being a good neighbor." But they both knew it was more than that. No other neighbor had shown up at dawn to safeguard her property. "At least let me offer you coffee," Danielle said. "You must be exhausted." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Coffee would be welcome. Inside, the house was mercifully dry. Danielle quickly kindled a fire in the stove and set water to boil while Jacob removed his muddy boots and duster, leaving them on the porch. The domestic scene was strangely intimate, Danielle preparing coffee in her small kitchen while Jacob stood by the fireplace, his tall frame making the room seem smaller than usual. Neither spoke until she handed him a steaming cup. "Thank you." He took a careful sip. "Good coffee." "One thing Boston ladies learn is how to brew proper coffee," Danielle said lightly, trying to ease the sudden tension she felt in his presence, a hint of a smile. "One of many skills, I imagine. How is Caleb? Did you make it home safely last night?" he's fine. Excited about the adventure of it all, Jacob's expression warmed at the mention of his nephew. We had to take the high trail, added an hour to the ride, but we stayed dry enough. He's fortunate to have you, Danielle said softly. Many orphaned children don't find such devoted guardians. Jacob's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. It should have been his father raising him. My brother Thomas was the steady one, the one who knew how to be a family man. I'm just doing my best to fill boots too big for me. The vulnerability in the admission surprised her. I think you underestimate yourself, Mr. Everett. Caleb clearly adores you, and he's a well-adjusted, intelligent boy. That speaks to the home you've provided. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Call me Jake, he said quietly. Mr. Everett makes me feel like my father. The invitation to informality felt significant. Jake, she repeated, testing the name. Then you must call me Danielle, at least when we're not in official settings. He nodded, holding her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly proper. Danielle. The way he said her name, low and resonant, sent an unexpected shiver through her. Flustered, she turned to the stove, refilling his cup to hide her reaction. Your garden's a loss, I'm afraid, Jake said after a moment. But the soil will be richer for it when the water recedes. I can have my men bring some seedlings from our greenhouse if you'd like to replant. You have a greenhouse? Danielle asked, surprised. My sister-in-law's project. She missed her Virginia flowers. After she died, I kept it going for Caleb's sake. Reminds him of his mother. Another glimpse into the man behind the stern exterior, one who maintained a greenhouse to honor a dead woman's memory and comfort her son. I would appreciate the seedlings, thank you. And perhaps some advice. My gardening experience is limited to a few potted herbs on a Boston windowsill. I'll do better than advice. I'll send Miguel, our gardener. He has a way with growing things. They talked for another half hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Danielle would have expected. Jake spoke of his ranch, his plans for expanding his herds, and his hopes for Caleb's future. Danielle shared stories of Boston and her teaching experiences. When he finally rose to leave, Danielle felt a curious reluctance to see him go. Thank you again for the sandbags, she said, walking him to the door. And the company. Jake paused on the threshold, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. The town's holding a social next Saturday, dance to celebrate spring planting being finished. Would you consider attending with me? The invitation caught her off guard. With you, as in? As my guest, he clarified, a hint of uncertainty in his usually confident demeanor. If that's not too forward. Danielle knew she should consider the implications carefully. A schoolteacher's reputation was her most valuable asset, and being seen openly as the object of a man's interest could invite scrutiny. Yet the thought of spending an evening in Jake's company was undeniably appealing. I'd be honored, she heard herself say. Though I should warn you, I'm more accustomed to Boston waltzes than frontier dances. The smile that transformed his face made her heart skip a beat. Don't worry. I'm a patient teacher. After he left, Danielle sat on her porch, watching as the floodwaters gradually receded, leaving mud and debris in their wake. Like the land around her, she felt as though something had been washed away her careful professional distance, her determination to focus solely on her teaching duties. Jacob Everett Jake had breached her defenses as surely as the creek had overflowed its banks. And like the flood, she suspected the effects would be lasting. The week leading up to the social was filled with anticipation and nervous energy. Danielle found herself checking her limited wardrobe repeatedly, finally settling on her best dress, a cornflower blue silk that complemented her eyes and showed off her slender figure to advantage without being too formal for a frontier gathering. Word of her accepting Jake's invitation had spread through town with predictable speed. Sarah Miller teased her gently about taming the most eligible bachelor in the territory, while Mrs. Finch offered unsolicited advice about the importance of maintaining propriety even in courtship. Not that I presume Mr. Everett's intentions, the older woman had added with a meaningful look, but a woman in your position must be above reproach. Danielle had assured her that the invitation was merely neighborly, though privately she wondered if that was entirely true. The way Jake had looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he said her name, these suggested something beyond mere neighborliness. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather-clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the scent of desert flowers in the air. Danielle was putting the finishing touches on her appearance when a knock sounded at her door. Jake stood on her porch, hat in hand, dressed in what was clearly his best outfit: clean, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored vest. His dark hair was neatly combed and he had trimmed his beard. The effect was striking. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. Danielle felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, you're quite handsome yourself." He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Shall we?" The town hall had been transformed for the occasion with lanterns, wildflowers, and tables laden with food and drink. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and several couples were already dancing. Their entrance together caused a brief lull in conversation, before the buzz resumed with increased intensity. Danielle was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments, but Jake seemed oblivious or unconcerned as he guided her through the crowd, stopping to introduce her to those she hadn't yet met. "Miss Whitley, Mr. Everett." Mayor Green called, waving them over to where he stood with his wife. "So pleased you could join us. I must say, you make a handsome couple." "The mayor's getting ahead of himself," Jake said smoothly, though his hand remained firmly at the small of Danielle's back. "Miss Whitley was kind enough to accept my invitation, that's all." Mrs. Green, a plump, cheerful woman, winked at Danielle. "For now, perhaps, but I haven't seen Jake at a social in over a year, so you must be special indeed, my dear." Before Danielle could formulate a response, the band struck up a new tune, a lively reel that sent couples hurrying to the dance floor. "Would you care to dance?" Jake asked, his blue eyes warm with invitation. "I'd like that very much," Danielle replied, "though I may need guidance on the steps." "Just follow my lead." His hand clasped hers, warm and strong, as he led her to the dance floor. The dance was faster and more energetic than the formal waltzes Danielle was accustomed to, but Jake proved to be an excellent partner, guiding her through the unfamiliar patterns with gentle pressure and whispered instructions. "You're a natural," he murmured as they circled each other. "Or perhaps you're just an excellent teacher," she countered, breathless from both the exertion and his proximity. They danced 3 consecutive songs before Danielle needed a break, her cheeks flushed with exertion and pleasure. Jake escorted her to the refreshment table, fetching them both cups of punch. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, watching her over the rim of his cup. "Very much. It's livelier than the socials I attended in Boston." "Less rigid, you mean?" There was amusement in his tone. "Perhaps. Though there's something to be said for structure and propriety." She glanced around at the boisterous gathering. "But I'm finding I appreciate the authenticity here. People are more genuine, including me." The question held a hint of challenge. Danielle met his gaze directly. "Especially you, Jake. You're perhaps the most genuine person I've ever met." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made her heart beat faster. Before he could respond, they were interrupted by Reverend Simmons. "Miss Whitley, Mr. Everett." The clergyman's tone was cordial enough, though his expression suggested disapproval. "I trust you're enjoying the festivities." "Very much so, Reverend," Danielle replied politely. "I'm pleased to see you participating in community events," he continued, addressing her specifically. "A teacher's influence extends beyond the classroom, after all. The moral example you set is as important as the knowledge you impart." The implied criticism was subtle but unmistakable. Danielle felt Jake stiffen beside her. "Miss Whitley's moral character is beyond reproach," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "As is her dedication to her students. The children of Silver Creek are fortunate to have her." Reverend Simmons's lips thinned. "Indeed. I merely meant that all of us in positions of influence must be mindful of our associations." Jake took a step forward, his expression hardening. "If you have something specific to say, Reverend, say it plainly." Tension crackled between the two men. Danielle placed a restraining hand on Jake's arm. I believe the Reverend is simply reminding me of my responsibilities, she said smoothly. Which I take very seriously, as does Mr. Everett. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe they're starting another dance. She practically pulled Jake away, feeling his muscles rigid beneath her hand. That's sanctimonious, he began once they were out of earshot. Please, Danielle interrupted. Don't let him ruin the evening. He's entitled to his opinions, misguided as they may be. Jake looked down at her, his anger gradually fading. You're right, I apologize. I just don't like anyone questioning your character, especially when it's only because you're seen with me. With you? I don't understand, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Simmons and I have a history. He doesn't approve of my lack of religious fervor, or my occasional whiskey, or the fact that I allow my ranch hands to play cards on Sundays. So his disapproval of our dancing together has more to do with you than with me, partly. Though he'd likely disapprove of any unmarried woman spending time with a man outside of formal courtship. A wry smile. Which this isn't, of course. Of course, Danielle echoed, feeling a curious mixture of relief and disappointment at the clarification. The band began a slower tune, and Jake's expression softened. One more dance before I take you home. I promise not to damage your reputation beyond repair. She should have declined, should have been mindful of the watchful eyes and wagging tongues. Instead, she found herself stepping into his arms. I'll risk it, she said quietly. This dance was different, slower, more intimate. Jake held her closer than was strictly proper, his hand warm at her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. Danielle was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, every subtle shift of his body guiding hers. You're quiet, he observed as they moved together in perfect harmony. I'm enjoying the moment, she replied truthfully. It's been a long time since I danced with someone who made me forget the steps. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Danielle, whatever he might have said was lost as the music ended. For a heartbeat, they remained motionless, caught in a moment of connection that transcended the crowded room and curious onlookers. Then reality intruded in the form of enthusiastic applause for the musicians, breaking the spell. I should take you home, Jake said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. It's getting late. The walk to Danielle's house was quiet, both of them seemingly lost in thought. The night was beautiful, with a canopy of stars overhead and the gentle sounds of the desert as their accompaniment. At her door, Jake hesitated. Thank you for coming with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourself despite Simmons's interference. I had a wonderful time, Danielle assured him, the best evening I've had since arriving in Silver Creek. He studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. May I call on you again? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities and complications. Yes, she said simply. I'd like that. Something like relief crossed his features. Good, that's good. He cleared his throat. Good night, Danielle. Good night, Jake, she watched from her doorway as he walked away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only then did she release the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Something had shifted between them tonight, something significant and potentially life-changing. Danielle closed her door, leaning against it as she tried to make sense of her conflicted emotions. She had come to Arizona territory to teach, to make a difference in children's lives. Romance had been the furthest thing from her mind. Yet here she was, heart racing at the memory of Jake's hand at her waist, his blue eyes intent on hers as they danced. What would come of it, she couldn't say. But for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Danielle allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just her classroom and her solitary house. A future that might include Jacob Everett. The following weeks brought a deepening of their connection. Jake began to call on her regularly, sometimes bringing Caleb for Sunday dinner after church, other times arriving alone in the evenings to sit on her porch and talk as the sun set over the desert. Their conversations ranged widely from books they had read to their differing experiences of the war years, from childhood memories to hopes for the future. Danielle discovered that beneath Jake's rugged exterior lay a thoughtful mind and a kind heart. He had fought for the Union not out of political conviction, but because he believed slavery was morally wrong. He had taken in his orphaned nephew without hesitation, rearranging his entire life to accommodate a grieving child. And though he rarely spoke of it, she sensed in him a loneliness that matched her own, a yearning for connection that transcended the casual friendships and community bonds they both maintained. As May turned to June, Danielle found herself watching for his approach each evening, her heart lifting at the sight of his tall figure on horseback. The townsfolk had noticed their growing closeness, of course. Some, like the Millers, viewed the developing relationship with approval. Others, particularly Reverend Simmons and his more conservative parishioners, were less enthusiastic. "You must consider your position," Mrs. Finch reminded her after church one Sunday, her voice lowered to avoid being overheard. "A teacher must be above reproach. Mr. Everett is respected, certainly, but he's not a church-going man in the proper sense, and there are stories, Danielle repeated, her stomach tightening. About his younger days, before the war, he had quite the reputation as a wild one. Mrs. Finch patted her hand. "People change, of course, but impressions linger." Danielle had thanked her for the concern but firmly changed the subject. Whatever Jake might have been in his youth, the man she was coming to know was honorable, thoughtful, and decent. His past was his own, just as hers was hers. And she had her own secrets, reasons beyond professional ambition that had driven her from Boston to this remote territory. Reasons she had not shared with anyone, not even Jake. It was a warm evening in mid-June when everything changed between them. School had ended for the summer, giving Danielle more free time. She had spent the day working in her garden, which had flourished under Miguel's expert guidance. Jake had promised to stop by with a book he thought she might enjoy, a collection of Walt Whitman's poems that had belonged to his sister-in-law. The sun was setting when he arrived, casting long shadows across her yard. Danielle had just finished washing up, her hair still damp at the temples, her simple day dress exchanged for a lighter one more suitable for the evening heat. "You look lovely," Jake said by way of greeting, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "Like you belong here." The comment pleased her more than it should have. "I'm beginning to feel as though I do," she gestured to the porch chairs. "Shall we sit outside? The breeze is pleasant." They settled into what had become their usual places, Jake in the larger chair, Danielle in the smaller one with its faded cushion. He handed her the book, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Thank you. I've read some of Whitman's work, but I don't have this collection. Elizabeth, my sister-in-law, used to read from it to Caleb and Thomas in the evenings." His expression softened at the memory. "She had a beautiful reading voice. Reminded me of you, actually, when you read to the children at school. That's a lovely compliment." Danielle opened the volume, noting the delicate handwriting on the flyleaf to Elizabeth, my heart's companion. "Thomas, they were very much in love," Jake said, following her gaze. "From the moment they met, Thomas wrote her poetry, terrible poetry, mind you, but heartfelt. She kept every scrap." "You miss them both very much." It wasn't a question, but Jake nodded anyway. "Every day, more for Caleb's sake than my own. A boy should have his parents." "He's fortunate to have you," Danielle said gently. "Not every orphan child finds such a loving home." Jake's gaze shifted to the sunset, his profile strong against the golden light. "I've tried to do right by him, not always sure I've succeeded." "You have. He's a wonderful boy, kind, intelligent, curious about the world. That doesn't happen by accident." He turned to her then, his blue eyes intense. "You see the best in people, don't you? Even rough-edged ranchers with questionable pasts." So he had heard the whispers, too. Danielle set the book aside, choosing her words carefully. "I see you, Jake. Not some town gossip version of you, but the man who brings his nephew books from San Francisco, who maintains a greenhouse because it reminds a boy of his mother, who shows up at dawn to protect a schoolteacher's house from flooding." She met his gaze steadily. "That's the man I've come to know. The rest is just history." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she had rarely glimpsed. "And if that history isn't as honorable as you might wish, if there are parts of my past I'm not proud of, we all have regrets, Jake. Actions we wish we could undo, choices we would make differently if given another chance." Her voice softened. "The measure of a person isn't in their mistakes, but in what they learn from them." He studied her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her expression. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached across the space between them and took her hand in his. "Danielle," he said, his voice low and intense, "I need to tell you something I should have said before now." Her heart began to race, though whether from anticipation or apprehension she couldn't say. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words were simple, direct like the man himself. "Have been since that first day when you looked at me across the street, like I was some kind of dangerous creature you'd never encountered before." Danielle's breath caught in her throat. She had imagined this moment, dreamed of it even, but the reality of his declaration left her momentarily speechless. "You don't have to say anything," he continued when she remained silent. "I know it's too soon, that you have your teaching to consider, that there are 100 reasons why a refined Boston lady shouldn't entangle herself with someone like me. But I needed you to know how I feel." Finding her voice at last, Danielle squeezed his hand. "Jake, but whatever she might have said was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, urgent, rapid, drawing closer by the second. Jake was on his feet in an instant, his posture alert, one hand moving instinctively toward the gun he wore even for social calls. "Stay here," he said, his tone brooking no argument. A rider appeared at the end of the street, pushing his horse hard. Even in the fading light, Danielle recognized Miguel, Jake's ranch hand and gardener. "Patron," he called, reining in his lathered mount before the house. "Come quickly." "It's Caleb." Jake was down the porch steps in 3 strides. "What's happened?" He fell from the hayloft. "Dr. Miller is with him, but the boy is asking for you." Miguel's expression was grave. "It's bad, Patron." Without hesitation, Jake turned to Danielle. "I have to go." "Of course." "Can I help? Should I come with you?" The words tumbled out, her concern for both Jake and Caleb overriding everything else. For a heartbeat, indecision crossed his face. Then he nodded. "Yes, he's fond of you. Having you there might help." Within minutes, they were racing toward the Everett Ranch, Jake on his own mount that Miguel had thoughtfully brought along. Danielle riding behind Miguel, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist as they galloped through the gathering darkness. The ranch house loomed large against the twilight sky as they approached a substantial 2-story structure surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Lights blazed from every window, illuminating the yard where several anxious ranch hands paced. Jake dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, reaching up to help Danielle down from behind Miguel. His face was a mask of controlled fear as he led her into the house. Dr. Miller met them in the entrance hall, his expression grim but professional. "Jake, Miss Whitley, he's in his room." "How bad?" Jake asked, his voice tight. "Broken leg, several cracked ribs, possible internal bleeding. He hit his head in the fall. That's what concerns me most. He was unconscious for several minutes." The doctor placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "I've done what I can for now." "The next few hours will tell us more." Jake nodded, his jaw clenched. "Can we see him?" "Yes, but briefly. He needs rest, doctor." Miller led them upstairs to a bedroom that clearly belonged to a young boy. Shelves of books and small treasures, a desk with half-finished schoolwork, walls decorated with drawings and maps. Caleb lay in the bed, his small face pale against the pillows, one leg splinted and bandaged, his chest wrapped tightly. "Uncle Jake." His voice was weak, barely audible. Jake was at his side in an instant, kneeling beside the bed, his large hand gently covering the boy's smaller one. "I'm here, partner. You gave us quite a scare." A ghost of a smile crossed Caleb's bruised face. "Sorry, I was trying to reach the new kittens. They were hiding in the hayloft. Don't worry about that now. Just rest and get better." Jake's voice was steady, though Danielle could see the tension in his shoulders. Caleb's gaze shifted, finding her standing behind Jake. "Miss Whitley, you came too?" Danielle moved closer, her heart aching at the sight of the injured child. "Of course I did. We all want you to get well." "Will you stay?" he asked, his eyes already drooping with the medicine Dr. Miller had administered. "Both of you will be right here," Jake promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Sleep now, Caleb." They watched as the boy drifted into slumber, his breathing shallow but steady. Only when Caleb was fully asleep did Jake stand, his face haggard with worry. "Let's let him rest," Dr. Miller suggested, ushering them out of the room. "I've given him something for pain that will help him sleep through the night." In the hallway, Jake turned to the doctor. Tell me honestly, James, how serious is it? Dr. Miller sighed. The head injury is my main concern. There could be swelling or bleeding inside the skull. The next 12 hours are critical. If he wakes normally in the morning, that's a good sign. If not. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Jake nodded, his expression grim. What can we do? Wait, monitor him. Wake him every 2 hours to check his responses. If he becomes difficult to rouse or seems confused, send for me immediately. The doctor gathered his bag. I'll return at first light to check on him. After Dr. Miller departed, Jake led Danielle to a comfortable sitting room downstairs. The house was surprisingly elegant inside, with well-crafted furniture and touches that spoke of a woman's influence. Elizabeth's, Danielle assumed, preserved by Jake after her death. You should eat something, she suggested gently, noting how drawn his face looked. It could be a long night. He shook his head. I'm not hungry, but please help yourself. Maria can prepare whatever you'd like. I'm fine, but you need your strength, Jake. She placed a hand on his arm. For Caleb, the reminder seemed to reach him. He nodded wearily. You're right, I'll ask Maria to bring something. While a housekeeper prepared a light meal, Jake showed Danielle to a guest room where she could rest if needed. I apologize for bringing you into this, he said as they stood in the doorway. I wasn't thinking clearly. Don't apologize. I'm glad to be here to help in any way I can. She hesitated, then added softly, about what you said earlier on the porch. Jake held up a hand to stop her. This isn't the time. Caleb needs my full attention now. Of course, she agreed quickly, but know that I'm here, not just for Caleb, but for you too. Something flickered in his eyes, gratitude, perhaps, or deeper emotion. Thank you. The night passed in tense vigilance. Every 2 hours, Jake would go upstairs to check on Caleb, gently rousing the boy and asking simple questions to assess his mental state. Between these checks, he paced the sitting room or stood at the window, staring out into the darkness. Danielle stayed with him, offering quiet support, making sure he ate and drank at regular intervals. They spoke little, the weight of concern too heavy for casual conversation, but her presence seemed to steady him. Dawn was breaking when Caleb awoke on his own, calling for his uncle. Jake bounded up the stairs with Danielle close behind. They found the boy pale but alert, his eyes clearer than they had been the night before. I'm thirsty, he said, his voice stronger. Jake's face lit with relief as he helped Caleb take small sips of water. How do you feel, partner? My leg hurts, and my head. Caleb grimaced. Did I really fall from the hayloft? You did, gave everyone quite a scare. I remember trying to reach the kittens. Caleb's brow furrowed. Did someone get them? They might be hungry. Jake laughed, the sound edged with relief. Miguel found them. They're fine, being spoiled in the kitchen as we speak. Good. Caleb relaxed back against his pillows, then noticed Danielle standing near the door. Miss Whitley, you stayed. She moved closer, smiling warmly. I did. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Are you going to stay for breakfast? Maria makes the best pancakes. The simple, childish question brought tears to Danielle's eyes. I'd love to if your uncle doesn't mind. Jake's gaze met hers over Caleb's head, filled with gratitude and something deeper. We'd be honored to have you stay as long as you like. Dr. Miller arrived soon after, examining Caleb thoroughly before pronouncing him out of immediate danger. The fact that he's alert, remembering details, and hungry are all excellent signs, he told Jake and Danielle in the hallway. He'll need time to heal 6 weeks at least for the leg, several weeks for the ribs, and he should remain quiet for the next few days to give his head time to recover, but I believe the worst has passed. The relief was palpable. Jake thanked the doctor profusely, then instructed Maria to prepare a substantial breakfast for everyone. The atmosphere in the house lightened considerably, though Caleb was instructed to remain in bed. After breakfast, Danielle sat with Caleb while Jake consulted with his foreman about ranch business that had been neglected during the crisis. The boy was tired but eager for company, asking Danielle to read to him from one of his favorite books. Uncle Jake reads to me every night, Caleb confided as she finished a chapter. Even when he's tired from working all day, he says books are as important as fresh air and good food. Your uncle is a wise man, Danielle replied, touched by this additional evidence of Jake's devotion. He likes you a lot, Caleb continued with the directness of children. He smiles more when you're around, and he wears his good shirts when he's going to see you. Danielle felt her cheeks warm. Does he now? Caleb nodded earnestly. I think he might want to marry you someday. Would you like that? To be my aunt? Then you could live here and teach me every day instead of just at school. Before Danielle could formulate a response to this innocent but startling question, Jake appeared in the doorway, having evidently overheard at least part of the conversation. His expression was a mixture of embarrassment and amusement. Caleb, you're supposed to be resting, not interrogating Miss Whitley. I'm not tired, the boy protested, though his eyelids were indeed drooping. And I was just asking, I heard what you were asking, and it's not an appropriate question. Jake's tone was firm but gentle. Miss Whitley is our guest and your teacher. She deserves your respect. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, Caleb said, looking chagrined. Danielle smiled reassuringly at the boy. You weren't, Caleb, but your uncle is right, you should rest now. Perhaps I can read to you again later. Mollified, Caleb settled back against his pillows. Within minutes, he was asleep, the excitement and his injuries having exhausted him. Jake motioned for Danielle to join him in the hallway. I apologize for that, he said quietly once they were out of Caleb's hearing. Children have no filter. There's no need to apologize. It was sweet, actually. She hesitated, then added, he loves you very much. That's evident in everything he says about you. Jake's expression softened. He's all the family I have left. I'd do anything for him. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Danielle had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. About what I said last night before Miguel arrived. I meant it, Danielle, but I understand if you don't feel the same way or if you're not ready to. She stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. I feel it too, Jake. I have for some time now. I was afraid of my own desires, of wanting something that seemed so different from the life I had planned. His eyes searched hers. Hope and uncertainty mingled in their blue depths. And now I'm standing in your home, caring for your nephew, realizing that what I want has changed. That you and Caleb have become important to me in ways I never anticipated. She took a deep breath. I'm falling in love with you too, Jake Everett. It terrifies me and exhilarates me in equal measure. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Then, with deliberate slowness, Jake reached out to cup her face in his hands. I'm afraid of my own desire, she whispered, her voice barely audible, of wanting this so much that I lose myself in it. Then desire me safely, he replied, his words a gentle promise. I'll never ask for more than you're willing to give. And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and tender against hers. Danielle's arms found their way around his neck as she returned the kiss, pouring months of suppressed longing into the embrace. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he murmured. Not just today, but stay, be part of our lives, part of my life. It wasn't quite a proposal, but the intention behind the words was clear. Danielle knew there would be challenges, the town's gossip, Reverend Simmons's disapproval. Her own lingering fears about abandoning the path she had believed was her calling. But in that moment, with Jake's arms around her and the knowledge of Caleb's innocent approval, none of those concerns seemed insurmountable. Yes, she answered simply. I'll stay. Caleb's recovery progressed steadily over the following weeks. Danielle divided her time between her house in town and the Everett ranch, gradually becoming a familiar presence in both settings. Jake was careful to maintain propriety in public, but privately, their relationship deepened with each passing day. They spoke of the future of marriage, of family, of building a life together. Jake revealed more of his past, including the wild years that had earned him his reputation and the profound impact of war on his perspective. Danielle shared her own history, including the real reasons she had left Boston, a broken engagement to a man who had proven false, and parents who had made it clear that her value lay primarily in making an advantageous match. They wouldn't approve of you, she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset. A frontier rancher with no prestigious family connections or social standing in Boston society. Jake chuckled, his arm around her shoulders. I imagine not. Would that matter to you? She considered the question honestly. It might have once. Now I find I care more about being true to my heart than meeting their expectations." "And what does your heart tell you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Danielle turned to face him, meeting his gaze directly. "That I love you, Jake Everett. That I want to build a life with you and Caleb. That I've found my home here with you." The joy that transformed his features was answer enough, but he put it into words anyway. "I love you too, Danielle Whitley, more than I ever thought possible." The formal proposal came a week later, after Caleb had been declared well enough to move around with the aid of crutches. Jake had arranged for a special dinner to celebrate the boy's progress, inviting Dr. and Mrs. Miller to join them. After the meal, as they all sat in the comfortable parlor, Jake excused himself briefly, returning with a small box in his hand. Kneeling before Danielle in full view of their guests and Caleb, he opened the box to reveal a delicate ring with a small but perfect diamond. "Danielle Whitley," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of being a mother to Caleb and a partner to me for all the days to come?" Tears filled Danielle's eyes as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. Then, finding her voice, she said simply, "Yes, Jake, with all my heart, yes." The small gathering erupted in congratulations and well wishes. Caleb especially was ecstatic, hobbling over on his crutches to hug them both. "Now you really will be my aunt," he exclaimed joyfully. "And you can live here all the time." "That's the plan, partner," Jake said, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. News of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Most of the townspeople were supportive, having witnessed the positive influence Danielle had on both Jake and Caleb. Even Reverend Simmons, while not effusive, offered measured congratulations and an invitation to premarital counseling that Jake surprised everyone by accepting. "For your sake," he explained to Danielle privately, "I know the church is important to you." Her heart swelled at this further evidence of his willingness to accommodate what mattered to her, just as she had embraced aspects of his life that were foreign to her Boston upbringing. They set the wedding date for August, before the new school term would begin. Danielle wrote to her parents, informing them of her engagement and inviting them to attend, though she held little hope they would make the journey. Jake insisted on building an addition to the ranch house, a dedicated schoolroom where Danielle could continue to teach Caleb and perhaps other children from neighboring ranches, who found it difficult to travel to town daily. "I don't want you to give up teaching," he told her as they reviewed the architect's drawings. "It's part of who you are, part of what I love about you." The gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you for understanding that. But I want you to know that being your wife and Caleb's mother will be my primary joy. We'll find the balance together," he promised. "That's what partners do." As the wedding day approached, Danielle was surprised to receive a letter from her mother announcing that she and Danielle's father would indeed be attending the ceremony. The letter was cool but not hostile, expressing curiosity about the man who had captured their daughter's heart and a desire to see for themselves the life she had chosen. "Are you nervous about them coming?" Jake asked when she shared the news. "A little," she admitted. "They can be judgmental. And they had such different plans for me. We'll face them together," he assured her, taking her hand, "just as we'll face everything else life throws our way." The Whitleys arrived 3 days before the wedding, clearly taken aback by the frontier town despite having been warned what to expect. Danielle's father, a successful Boston merchant, looked particularly out of place in his formal Eastern attire. Their first meeting with Jake was stilted but civil. He welcomed them to his ranch with impeccable courtesy, giving them the best guest room and instructing Maria to prepare dishes that might appeal to Eastern palates. "So you're the man who has persuaded our daughter to bury herself in this wilderness," Mr. Whitley remarked during dinner, his tone barely civil. "Father," Danielle protested, but Jake placed a calming hand over hers. "Sir, I didn't persuade Danielle of anything. She made her own choice to come west long before we met. I'm simply fortunate enough that she's chosen to share her life with me and Caleb." Mrs. Whitley's gaze softened slightly as it fell on Caleb, who was making a determined effort to display perfect table manners. "The boy is your ward, I understand. My nephew and my son in every way that matters," Jake confirmed. Danielle has been wonderful with him both as his teacher and as a friend. She was always good with children, Mrs. Whitley acknowledged, the first positive statement she had made since arriving. Even as a girl, she showed a talent for teaching. The evening proceeded with cautious conversation, neither hostile nor warm. After Caleb was sent to bed, Jake invited Mr. Whitley to his study for brandy, leaving Danielle alone with her mother for the first time. "He's not what I expected," Mrs. Whitley admitted, her voice lowered despite the men being out of earshot. "From your letter, I imagined someone rougher." "Jake is educated and cultured in his own way," Danielle replied. "He reads extensively, values learning, and treats everyone with respect. Those qualities matter more to me than social polish." Mrs. Whitley studied her daughter's face. "You truly love him with all my heart." And the boy. "You're prepared to become a mother at 23 to a child who isn't your own," Danielle's expression softened. "Caleb is wonderful, mother. Bright, kind, eager to learn. Loving him is the easiest thing in the world." After a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Whitley reached out to take Danielle's hand. "Then I will try to be happy for you, my dear. Your father may take longer to come around, but we want your happiness, even if we don't understand your choices." It wasn't wholehearted approval, but it was more than Danielle had expected. "Thank you, Mother. That means more to me than you know." Over the next 2 days, a gradual thawing occurred. Mr. Whitley, initially dismissive of ranching as a profession, became reluctantly impressed by the scope and success of Jake's operation. Mrs. Whitley, observing the easy affection between Danielle and Caleb, began to see the appeal of the ready-made family her daughter was joining. The wedding itself was a simple but beautiful affair, held in the Silver Creek Church with Reverend Simmons officiating. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the small church to capacity. Danielle wore a gown of ivory silk that Sarah Miller had helped her alter from one of her mother's older dresses, something old and something borrowed in one. Her hair was adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning, and she carried a bouquet of roses from Jake's greenhouse. Jake waited at the altar in a new suit ordered specially from San Francisco, his usually wind-blown hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. Beside him stood Caleb, proudly serving as best man despite still needing a cane to help him walk. As Danielle walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes locked with Jake's. The love shining in his gaze made her heart soar. This was right. This was where she belonged. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When it came time for their vows, Jake took both her hands in his voice steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. "Danielle," he added, departing from the traditional words, "you brought light and learning into our lives when we needed it most. I promise to nurture your spirit as you've nurtured Caleb's mind, to support your dreams as you've supported our family. To love you completely and faithfully until my last breath." Tears glistened in Danielle's eyes as she made her own promises, adding, "Jake, you showed me what true strength looks like, not in domination but in tenderness, not in rigidity but in growth. I promise to walk beside you through whatever challenges life brings, to create a home filled with love and learning, and to cherish every day of the journey we begin today." As Reverend Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, Jake drew her into a kiss that was both gentle and passionate, a promise of all they would share in the years to come. The celebration afterward was a joyous blend of frontier practicality and Eastern refinement, tables laden with food prepared by the women of Silver Creek, music provided by local fiddlers, dancing that continued well into the evening. Mr. and Mrs. Whitley, seeing their daughter's evident happiness, gradually relaxed into the festivities. By the time they departed 2 days later, a tentative peace had been established, with promises of visits in both directions in the future. As summer turned to autumn and then to winter, Danielle settled fully into her new life as Mrs. Jacob Everett. She continued teaching at the Silver Creek School while developing the home classroom for Caleb and several neighboring children. Jake expanded his ranching operations, secure in the knowledge that his home was now truly complete. Their love deepened with each passing day, growing from the initial attraction and admiration into a solid partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering commitment. One evening in early December, as they sat before the fire in their cozy parlor, Caleb already asleep upstairs, Danielle turned to her husband with a smile that held a secret. "I have news," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Jake's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with awe. "You're certain?" Dr. Miller confirmed it today. "In late June or early July, Caleb will have a little brother or sister." With a sound that was half laugh, half sob, Jake gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, "more than I can ever express." "I love you too," she replied, nestling against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. "Thank you for teaching me that it's safe to desire, to want, to love completely." "And thank you," he murmured, "for desiring me safely, for loving not just the man I am, but the man you help me become each day." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the desert in pristine white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Danielle and Jake Everett looked toward their future with hearts full of love and hope, a future born from a whispered confession and a tender promise beneath the vast Arizona sky. 7 months later, as summer heat shimmered across the land, Danielle gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah Everett. Caleb, fully recovered from his accident and thriving under Danielle's loving guidance, took to his role as big brother with pride and tenderness. And in the years that followed, the Everett Ranch became known throughout the territory, not just for its fine cattle and progressive agricultural methods, but for the warmth of its hospitality, the quality of education provided in its schoolroom, and above all, for the deep and abiding love that formed its foundation, a love that had begun with fear and whispered desires, and grown into the most beautiful certainty either Danielle or Jake had ever known.